My name is Hannah Carver. I'm 33, and for the past 2 years I've been an attending trauma surgeon at one of the busiest emergency rooms in eastern Tennessee. I've opened a chest cavity in a trauma bay with nothing but a scalpel and a rib spreader, while a patient's blood pressure dropped by the second. I've held a teenager's heart in my own hand and massaged it until it remembered how to beat on its own. And last July, my mother introduced me to her church friends as the babysitter. That was the same afternoon my brother's 5-year-old son stopped breathing in the lake. I had him breathing again before the ambulance even crossed the county line. But what happened afterward at the hospital, when the trauma chief walked into that waiting room and saw me sitting with everyone else like a stranger, that's the part my mother still hasn't found a way to explain to her book club. The night before the lake party, I worked a 16-hour shift. 3 surgeries back to back. A highway collision. A stabbing outside a downtown bar. And a motorcyclist who'd hit a guardrail at high speed and came in with a shattered femur, and a bleed I couldn't immediately locate. That last case was touch and go for almost 40 minutes. My hands were inside his abdomen, clamping a vessel I couldn't fully see, while the anesthesiologist called out his falling blood pressure. He stabilized around 2 in the morning. He walked out of the hospital 11 days later with a titanium rod and a story he'd tell for the rest of his life. I went back to the call room afterward and peeled off gloves stiff with dried antiseptic. My hands smelled like iodine. They always did. Renee, the night charge nurse, she'd been running trauma bays since before I started medical school, stuck her head in. "Carver, go home. You look like you went 10 rounds with a cement mixer." I told her I had notes to finish. She just shook her head. "If you're on shift, I sleep better. But even you need a bed sometime." She left a cup of black coffee on the counter. It went cold before I touched it. I drank it anyway, typing my surgical notes with one hand and scrolling my phone with the other. A text from my brother Cole. "Lake house party Saturday. Whole family. Bring a swimsuit." I stared at it for a long time. At work, people called me Dr. Carver. They trusted me with the worst moments of their lives. At home, things worked differently. I grew up in Callaway, Tennessee, 20 minutes south of Knoxville. Close enough to see the mountains from the back porch. Small enough that everyone knew whose father had poured their driveway. My dad, Walt Carver, ran a construction company, 3 trucks, a dozen crew members, early mornings, honest work. My mother, Eleanor, kept the house, organized the church bake sale, and had strong opinions about everyone's life except her own. My brother Cole was 4 years older, built like he'd been made for the family business, and from birth it was simply understood he'd take it over one day. Nobody said it out loud. They didn't have to. At our dinner table there were 2 seats that mattered, and they both faced Cole. I was the quiet one, the one reading anatomy books in the back seat during football games. When I got a full scholarship to a pre-med program, my mother's first response was, "For more years." "Then how many more after that? When are you coming home?" I told her plainly, "I'm building something, Mom." She changed the subject to Cole's new truck. The pattern started early, and it hardened fast. My second year of medical school, I called home on a Sunday. Eleanor put me on speakerphone. I could hear dishes clinking, the television, my father coughing in the background. A neighbor must have stopped by because I heard my mother say, bright as a church bulletin, "Oh, Hannah, she helps out at a clinic somewhere." "I'm in medical school, Mom," I said loud enough for the room. "I dissected a cadaver last Tuesday." She laughed. "Oh, you know what I mean." I didn't know what she meant. She meant she had already decided who I was, and the facts simply weren't invited to that conversation. That was the first time I heard her reshape me into something smaller. It wasn't the last. I want to be clear, I fought back. I was never the kind of woman who swallowed an insult and smiled politely. My first year of residency, I mailed home a framed copy of my medical degree. Doctor of Medicine. Summa cum laude. I packed it myself, insured it. 6 weeks later I visited and looked for it on the wall. Not in the hallway. Not in the living room. Not in the den, where Cole's contractor's license hung framed next to a photo of him shaking hands with a county official. I opened the hall closet. My diploma was leaning against the vacuum cleaner, still wrapped in bubble wrap. I pulled it out and set it on the kitchen table. Where should this go? Eleanor dried her hands on a towel. "Oh, honey, I just haven't found the right spot." I pointed at the wall behind the couch. where Cole's certificates hung in a neat row. Right there seems to work fine for Cole. She changed the subject to pot roast. The second time, I invited the whole family to my residency completion ceremony, 45 minutes away. My father said he had a concrete pour that week. My mother said the drive was too far. I stood in the auditorium and accepted my certificate next to colleagues whose families filled 3 rows. My department chief took the photo for me. The third time I called the day I passed my board certification. My mother picked up. "Mom, I'm board certified. I'm a trauma surgeon." "Oh, that's nice, honey. Cole just signed a contract for a 30-house development. Did he tell you?" "Mom, I'm a surgeon. Not a nurse. Not an aide. Playing nurse, playing doctor. What's the difference? You're still up at that hospital all hours." That was the last time I corrected her. Not because I gave up, because I redirected that energy toward the people who actually needed it. The ones bleeding on my table at 3 in the morning. Cole's lake house invitation sat unanswered on my phone for 2 days. I almost declined. I had a shift swap available, an easy excuse nobody in that family would have questioned. Then on Thursday evening my phone buzzed again. Not Cole this time. "Aunt Hannah." Tyler's voice, 5 years old and incapable of whispering. "Daddy says you're maybe coming to the lake. Are you coming? I learned to swim. I can float on my back and everything. I want to show you." Behind him I heard his mother Brienne prompting, "Say please, Tyler." I leaned against my kitchen counter. My apartment was quiet. It was always quiet. One reading chair, a stack of surgical journals, a plant on the shelf that somehow survived on neglect and fluorescent light. Tyler was the only person in that family who never needed me to be anything other than his aunt. He didn't care about diplomas or job titles. He just wanted me to watch him float. "I'll be there, buddy," I said. "Save me a spot on the dock." I called him my shift swap. On Friday night I packed shorts, a tank top, sunscreen, and out of habit the small emergency kit I kept in my car. Gauze, tape, a pocket CPR mask, a pen light. Trauma surgeons carry things. It's not paranoia. It's pattern recognition. You see enough emergencies start in ordinary places, and you stop assuming anywhere is safe. I also tossed in a child's life vest. Cole had mentioned Tyler took swimming lessons. Swimming lessons are not the same as open water. I clipped my hospital badge to my bag without thinking. I'd driven straight from my last shift. Some things you carry everywhere. I pulled into the gravel driveway at 11:15 Saturday morning. Cole's new lake house sat on a sloped lot above the water. A brown A-frame with a wraparound porch and a dock stretching into green water. The yard smelled like fresh-cut grass and charcoal. Tennessee in July. 92 degrees by noon, humidity thick enough to chew. A speaker on the porch played country music. Cars lined the drive. My dad's truck, my mom's sedan, a handful of SUVs I didn't recognize. Cole had invited half the town. I slung my bag over my shoulder and walked up the porch steps. My mother stood in the center of a small crowd, women from her church circle, a couple I vaguely recognized from the neighborhood. She saw me and waved with the arm not holding sweet tea. "Oh, there she is. Everyone, this is my daughter. She works up at the hospital." A woman in a floral blouse smiled. "Oh, a nurse. That's lovely." My mother didn't correct her. She turned her smile up a notch. "She's always been a helper." I set my bag down, looked the woman in the floral blouse directly in the eye. "I'm a surgeon, actually. Trauma surgery. I work in the emergency department." The woman's eyebrows went up. "Oh." My mother was already steering the conversation toward the potato salad. I stood there with my bag at my feet. I'd said the words. I always said the words. The problem was never my silence. The problem was that nobody in this family ever held on to the answer once I gave it. Brienne came out of the kitchen carrying a tray of deviled eggs like a trophy presentation. She hugged me with one arm, the kind that keeps distance while pretending closeness. "Hannah, you made it. We honestly didn't think you'd show. You're always so busy with your little job." I took a deviled egg off the tray. "Trauma surgery is a lot of things, Brienne. Little isn't one of them." She laughed, the way people laugh when they've already decided not to listen. "Can you help carry the cooler from the truck? You look strong." I carried the cooler. I wasn't going to fight about a cooler. I had bigger things to measure my anger against. On the porch, my father sat in a lawn chair with a beer, holding court with two men I recognized as old crew foremen. Mid-story about Cole pouring a foundation in record time. 40 yards of concrete in a single day. That boy works harder than anyone I know. I walked past. My father looked up. Hey kiddo. That was it. No question about work. No question about anything. I found Tyler down by the dock, crouched at the edge poking a stick at minnows. The second he saw me, he launched himself at my legs. I scooped him up. Show me this swimming you've been bragging about. He wiggled free and pointed at the water. Watch. I looked at the dock. No railing on the deep side. No life ring mounted anywhere. The water turned dark green just a few feet from the edge, a sudden drop-off. I called across the yard to Cole. Where's the life ring for this dock? He waved his burger spatula. It's a lake, Hannah, not an operating room. I left the child's life vest on the dock railing anyway. Some habits save lives. More guests arrived around noon. The pastor and his wife pulled up in a clean white sedan. My mother greeted them at the porch steps like visiting royalty. She walked them through introductions. My husband, 38 years. Our son runs the family business. You should see the development he's building. The best daughter-in-law a mother could ask for. Then she reached me. I was pouring lemonade for Tyler at the drink table. And this is Hannah. She put her hand on my shoulder and squeezed. She's our babysitter for the day. So good with Tyler. She laughed light and easy like it was a charming inside joke everyone understood. The pastor's wife smiled politely. I did not. I'm not the babysitter, Mom. I'm a surgeon. My mother's smile stayed perfectly locked in place. Oh, she's always so serious. You know how kids these days are. They all think they're saving the world. The pastor's wife glanced at me with something that might have been curiosity or pity. My mother was already steering her toward the dessert table. Tyler tugged my hand. Aunt Hannah. Why did Grandma call you the babysitter? I looked down at him. Honest kid, honest question. Because Grandma sometimes forgets what I do for work, buddy. He frowned. But you're a doctor. Yeah, I said, handing him his lemonade. I am. The progression was clear. And I tracked it the way I'd track a patient's declining vitals. First visit. She helps out at the hospital. Next, sort of a nurse. Now the babysitter. Each time a little further from the truth. Each time a little harder to correct without making a scene at someone else's party. In the early afternoon, I sat beside my father on the porch. He was on his third beer, and for a rare minute it was just the two of us. I tried. I want that understood. I kept trying even when the return on effort was zero. Dad, I had a tough case last week. 16-year-old motorcycle wreck. Came in with a ruptured spleen and a collapsed lung. We worked on him for 4 hours. He nodded slowly, the way he nods at weather reports. That's good. Glad you could help. Then without transition. You know Cole poured the new subdivision foundation himself. 40 yards. One day that boy is something else. I let a beat pass. I opened a teenager's chest in the back of an ambulance last month, Dad. Clamped a bleeding artery with my fingers while the rig was still moving. He looked at me, really looked for maybe 2 seconds. Well, that sounds intense. You be careful up there. Up there. Like the hospital was a distant country he'd heard of but never visited. Couldn't quite locate on a map. He wasn't cruel. I need that understood too. My father was a man who understood the world through what his hands could build, walls, foundations, porches like the one we sat on. My world existed inside chest cavities and fluorescent-lit bays, and it was as foreign to him as a submarine. He loved me the way you love a language you never learned. Good intentions, no comprehension. Still hurt. Love without understanding always does. Lunch came together under a canopy strung between 2 oaks. Burgers, coleslaw, baked beans, a sheet cake reading Carver Lake House in blue icing. Brienne ran the operation like a field general, seating, condiments, photo angles. I was cutting watermelon for Tyler at the kids' table when Brienne leaned over my shoulder, loud enough for the next table to hear. Hannah, you're such a natural with kids. Seriously, if the hospital thing doesn't work out, you could open a daycare. I didn't look up. The knife kept moving. The hospital thing is working out fine, Brienne. I removed a man's spleen 2 days ago. She wrinkled her nose. EW. Can we not talk about organs at lunch? My mother, seated nearby, nodded. She's right, Hannah. Nobody wants to hear about blood at a cookout. I set down the knife, wiped my hands, looked at Brienne, then my mother. You asked about my work. I told you about my work. If you don't want the answer, don't open the door. The table went quiet for a moment. Then Brienne turned to Cole about the dock lights, and the moment was papered over like it never happened. Cole sat 2 seats away. He'd heard everything. He kept eating his burger. Didn't defend me. Didn't deny it. Just chewed and stared at the lake. Grant understood the truth about my career. He just found silence more comfortable than confrontation. He'd been making that trade his whole life. After lunch, the adults gathered between the house and the dock. My father stood with a beer can raised like a gavel, cleared his throat the way men of his generation do before saying something they consider important. I want to say a few words. This lake house, this is what the Carver family is about. Hard work, real work, things you can stand on and point to and say, I built that. Cole, son, you took this family business and turned it into something your grandfather would be proud of. This place is proof. He raised his kin higher. To Cole. To Brienne. To this family that builds real things. My mother raised her glass of sweet tea. And to Brienne, the best daughter-in-law anyone could ask for. We are so blessed. Applause. Cups clinking. Nobody looked at me. I stood at the edge of the group with a glass of water, invisible as lawn furniture. I waited for my father to finish. Then I said it, not shouting, not whispering, just clear, flat, aimed directly at him. I build things too, Dad. They just happen to be inside people. He heard me. I know he heard me because his jaw shifted the way it does when he's deciding whether to engage or retreat. He chose retreat, turned back to the group, started a second toast about the quality of the dock wood. I drained my water, set the glass down, walked to the dock. Tyler followed. We sat with our feet in the water, and he leaned against my arm. Aunt Hannah, how come you look mad? I'm not mad, buddy. Just thinking about doctor stuff. Doctor stuff, he repeated. That conversation on the dock was the last quiet moment of the afternoon. The pastor's wife found me on the dock 20 minutes later. She'd kicked off her sandals and walked barefoot across the warm planks holding a slice of cake she hadn't touched. She sat beside me with the careful grace of someone used to comforting people in crisis. Your mother tells me you work at the hospital, she said gently. A nurse. I looked at the water, then at her. No. I'm an attending trauma surgeon. Board certified 2 years. I specialize in emergency surgery and penetrating trauma. If someone in this county gets shot, hit by a car or falls off a roof, there's a good chance I'm the one cutting them open at 3 in the morning. Her fork paused halfway to the cake. Your mother didn't mention any of that. She never does. She set the plate down. That's remarkable. Why would she? That's a question you'd have to ask her. I wasn't going to perform my mother's psychology for a woman I'd met an hour ago. But I also wasn't going to let one more person walk away from my brother's party thinking I handed out bandages for a living. I just want one person at this party to know what I actually do, I said. Now you do. She nodded, excused herself, and walked back up toward the canopy. I watched her lean close to my mother and say something I couldn't hear. My mother's face tightened. She glanced across the yard at me, sharp like a card player realizing someone else can see her hand. She didn't come to the dock. She just smiled wider at the next guest and poured more sweet tea. I turned back to the water. Somewhere behind me, the truth was circulating without my help. I went inside to use the bathroom. The house was cool and dim after the glare outside. On the kitchen counter, next to a bowl of car keys, there was a manila folder. The tab read, Important Documents, Eleanor C. I shouldn't have opened it. But my own name was visible on the second page, poking out from under a property deed. And when you see your name on a legal document you didn't sign, you look. It was an advance healthcare directive, dated 3 months earlier. Notarized. I read it standing up, one hand on the counter, the same focus I bring to a surgical chart. Section 1. Preferred medical decision maker Cole Carver. Section 2. Physician to consult, Dr. Raymond Hess, Family Medicine. Section 3. Additional notes. In my mother's handwriting, shaky but legible. Do not burden Hannah with these decisions. She has given enough of her life to that hospital. Let her rest. I read it twice. A third time, my mother had filled out a legal document about her own death, and specifically excluded her daughter, the trauma surgeon, the board-certified physician, the person in this family most qualified to make medical decisions under pressure. And her stated reason was mercy. She thought she was protecting me. I could see it almost. My mother as a girl waiting for her own mother, a midwife, to come to her school play, and her mother out on a back road delivering someone else's baby instead. Her mother who never came home one night because her heart gave out behind the wheel. My mother's fear had a face. It looked like mine. But understanding where a wound comes from doesn't make it bleed less. I closed the folder, put it back exactly where I found it, and walked back outside into the heat. That document sat in my chest like a second heartbeat for the rest of the afternoon. I came back to the party and acted like nothing had shifted. This is what I do in the operating room. When a patient's vitals start sliding and the person beside you is wide-eyed with panic, you don't match their energy. You go quieter, steadier. You compartmentalize the crisis into tasks and execute them one at a time until the bleeding stops. I applied the same discipline to that directive. Not now. Not here. I watched my mother circulate, refilling glasses, laughing as though the doc conversation had never happened. I watched my father tell the concrete story for the third time. I watched Brian angle her phone for a group photo, somehow arranging everyone so Cole stood in the center, and I stood at the very edge of the frame. "Lake life with the fam," she posted before anyone could blink. I sat on the dock steps and let the sun press into my shoulders. I was not going to confront my mother here about that document. The decision was strategic, not timid. Tyler was splashing in the shallows 10 feet away. This was his day too. I would not detonate the afternoon for a confrontation that could happen on my own terms, my own timeline. I'd learned that in the operating room. The moment you lose control of the timing, you lose the patient. Tyler climbed out, dripping, teeth chattering despite the heat. I wrapped him in a towel and rubbed his arms until the shivering stopped. He burrowed against my side. "Aunt Hannah, did you see me?" I swam all the way to the orange buoy. "I saw, buddy. You're getting fast." He tipped his head back, looking at me with his father's brown eyes. "When I grow up, I want to be a doctor like you." I stopped rubbing his arms. "You know I'm a doctor?" He squinted like I'd asked something obvious. "Yeah, Daddy told me. You fix people when they're really hurt. Like in the movies but real." I looked across the yard. Cole stood by the grill. He must have felt my eyes because he glanced over for 1 second. We held each other's gaze, and then he looked away, back to the Coles, back to the safe world of burgers and his father's approval. So Cole knew. Of course he knew. He'd always known. He told his own son the truth about me while living in a house where his parents told everyone a lie. He just never found the courage to correct them because correcting our mother meant a fight, and Cole had spent his whole life choosing the path that kept the peace. "You can be whatever you want, buddy," I said. "Doctor, builder, astronaut, anything. And I'll be there when you figure it out." He grinned and squirmed free, running back toward the water. He was the reason I kept showing up. He was also the reason what happened next tore through me the way it did. By 3 o'clock, the afternoon had settled into the loose, half-attentive stage where adults stopped paying close attention. My father dozed in his chair with his hat over his face. My mother and the pastor's wife were deep in conversation on the porch, heads close. Brian had gone inside. Cole and a couple of his friends had walked up the slope to look at a retaining wall. The kids, Tyler and 2 neighbor children, were in the water near the dock. No adult within arm's reach. I'd moved the child's life vest from the railing to the edge of the planking, closer to the water. Tyler hadn't put it on. I'd asked him twice. The second time I knelt down, held it open, said, "Arms in, buddy." Cole called from the slope. "He's fine, Hannah. He can touch the bottom." I looked at the water near him. He could not touch the bottom there. "Cole, watch that boy. It drops off." He waved me off the way he'd wave off a building inspector. "He knows not to go out that far." I set the vest where Tyler could reach it and stayed on the dock, feet in the water, eyes on the kids. The sun was angling lower now through the trees on the far shore, and the lake had shifted from bright green to something darker, harder to read. The dock creaked under me as I shifted my weight. The neighbor kids were dunking each other near the ladder, shrieking. Tyler drifted farther out toward the buoy. He'd been so proud of reaching earlier. He was treading water, then bobbing, then reaching for the buoy chain, and missing. 7 adults within 50 feet of that water. Not one of them was watching the children. I was. I'd never stopped watching. Some instincts don't have an off switch. Mine had been sharpened on a decade of reading situations that turn lethal in the space between one breath and the next. Sound carries over water, basic physics, minimal interference, maximum reach. So when my mother's voice drifted from the porch to the dock, I heard every syllable as clearly as if she were standing beside me. She was talking to the pastor's wife and another woman. Someone's cousin, I think, a friend of Hannah's. She answers phones at the hospital, I believe. Or maybe she hands out bandages. I can never quite keep track. You know how these young people are, they change jobs every other month. She said it lightly, casually, the way you describe a distant acquaintance whose name you keep forgetting. Not your daughter. Not the person whose diploma sat unopened in your closet for a year. This was worse than nurse. Worse than babysitter. This was a full, deliberate erasure, reducing years of surgical training and 1,000 nights in the trauma bay down to answering phones. I turned on the dock, jaw tight, opened my mouth, and then I saw Tyler. Face down, arms slack at his sides, 15 feet from the dock, past the drop-off where the green water turned black. Not splashing, not calling out, just floating motionless, his hair spread across the surface like lake grass. The neighbor kids were 20 feet behind him at the ladder, oblivious. Everything else, my mother's voice, the music, the clinking glasses, dropped out of my hearing like someone had cut the power. There was the boy. There was the water. And there was what I do. I kicked off my sandals and hit the water in 2 strides off the edge of the dock. The lake was colder than I expected. That Tennessee thermocline, warm on top, frigid underneath, and my legs cut through both layers as I swam. 15 feet. I reached him in seconds, flipped him face up with one arm, cradled his head against my shoulder. His lips were blue. His eyes were closed. His chest wasn't moving. I swam back, one arm pulling, one keeping his head above water. The dockwood scraped my forearm as I hauled him onto the planking. I didn't feel it. I tilted his head back, opened his airway, put my ear to his mouth. No breath. No movement. I reached for the protocol that lives in my hands the way music lives in a pianist's fingers. 2 rescue breaths first. That's the difference with drowning. Respiratory arrest, not cardiac. You lead with air, not compressions. I sealed my mouth over his, pinched his nose, breathed. His small chest rose. I breathed again. It rose again. No cough. No response. I shifted to compressions, one hand on his sternum, because he was 5 and his ribs were thin as balsa wood, and I had to calculate the force to compress without fracturing anything. 30 pushes, hard and fast, counting in my head. Then 2 more breaths. Behind me, the world was catching up. Brian screaming. A plate shattering somewhere. Cole's voice raw. Tyler. Tyler. Running feet pounding the dock boards. I did not look up. I did not stop. I breathed for him again. 30 more compressions. My hands did not shake. They have never shaken. Not during a 4-hour surgery. Not during a roadside resuscitation in the back of an ambulance. And not now, with Tyler's heartbeat under my palm, faint but fighting. On the 3rd cycle, he coughed. Lake water surged up and out of him, splashing across the boards. Another cough, deeper, wetter, his body convulsing under my hands. I rolled him onto his side, recovery position. He retched twice, coughed again. And then the sound I'd been waiting for. A ragged, gasping inhale. Breathing. Crying. Alive. I held him on his side and checked his pulse at the brachial artery, the pediatric checkpoint. Heart rate elevated, maybe 140, but steady and strong. His color was already coming back, blue lips fading to pink. I looked up for the first time. Cole was on his knees at the edge of the dock, white as the sheet cake, his hands reaching for his son but shaking too hard to hold anything. Brienne stood behind him, both hands pressed over her mouth. My father had frozen halfway down the slope, beer can still in hand. My mother stood at the top of the yard with both hands covering her face. I lifted Tyler and placed him gently into Cole's arms. Keep him on his side. If he vomits again, let it come out. Don't lay him on his back. Cole clutched his son, stammering. Someone call 911, I said. Tell them pediatric drowning, patient responsive, needs emergency assessment. Tell them we'll meet the ambulance at the top of the driveway. I wasn't asking. I was directing, the same voice I use at 3 in the morning when a trauma comes through the doors and every second is a negotiation with death. The doc went silent. For the first time in my life, my family did exactly what I told them. The ambulance arrived in 14 minutes. The lead paramedic, stocky, calm-handed, mid-40s, knelt beside Tyler and ran through vitals. Pulse ox climbing, respiratory rate normalizing, no signs of aspiration. He looked up at me. Who initiated CPR? I did. 2 rescue breaths first, then 30 compressions. He responded on the 3rd cycle. Submersion under 2 minutes. Total CPR roughly 90 seconds. He studied me the way medical people study each other, reading competence in the vocabulary. You're medical? Trauma surgeon. I nodded. Of course you are. He turned to the family. Your field save gave this kid the best possible outcome. Textbook ventilation first response. We'll transport for observation, but based on what I'm seeing, you bought him a full recovery. My mother spoke first from the back of the group. Well, anyone would have known to do that. The paramedic didn't even turn around, he was strapping Tyler to the stretcher. Ma'am, 90% of bystanders freeze during a pediatric drowning. What she did is not anyone. That's trained response. The silence after that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. They transported Tyler to the Regional Medical Center in Knoxville, the closest Level 1 trauma center. My hospital. I drove behind the ambulance in my own car, still in damp shorts and a tank top, hair stiff with dried lake water. No scrubs. No white coat. My hospital badge buried in my bag under a wet towel. We gathered in the ER waiting room, the same chairs I'd seen families collapse into after I'd told them their loved one would be okay, or that I'd done everything I could. Now I sat in one of those chairs on the wrong side of the doors. A nurse I knew, Marisol, walked past, glanced through the glass, slowed, looked again. Dr. Carver? I didn't see you on the schedule. Are you on shift? I shook my head slightly. Not now. She nodded and moved on. Cole stared at me from across the room. Did she just call you doctor? That's what people at my workplace call me, Cole. My mother filled the silence with narrative, the way she always did, talking to the pastor's wife, loud enough for the room to absorb. It happened so fast. 1 minute he was swimming, the next. Honestly, I thank God Cole got to him when he did. I got to him, Mom. Not Cole. She adjusted without missing a beat. Well, yes, you were in the water too. You helped. But the paramedic said anyone could have. The paramedic said the opposite. You were standing right there when he said it. Her fingers tightened on her purse strap. I'm just saying, let's not make this about who did what. The important thing is Tyler is okay. I leaned forward. You're right. The important thing is Tyler is okay. So maybe stop telling people a version of today where I wasn't the reason for that. The waiting room had that particular quality of silence where everyone is listening and nobody wants to admit it. My mother smoothed her skirt, one long deliberate stroke, and turned her face to the wall. She didn't argue. She didn't apologize. She just stopped talking, which for her was the nearest thing to surrender I'd ever witnessed. Cole found me in the hallway a few minutes later. His face was wrecked, the kind of face you see on parents in the ER when the adrenaline wears off and the magnitude of what almost happened starts to settle like concrete. Hannah, if you hadn't been there. But I was there. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. I should have listened about the life vest. I should have been watching the water. I was looking at a retaining wall while my son was. Yes, I said. You should have been watching. I didn't soften it. Some truths need their full weight. And I should have for years, Hannah. I should have said something to Mom and Dad about what you do. About who you are. I told Tyler. I never told them. Why didn't you? Because it was easier. Because as long as they were focused on building me up, I didn't have to fight them about tearing you down. I let that sit. There was a kind of courage in the admission, even years overdue. I don't need you to be sorry, Cole. I need you to stop being comfortable with their version of me. He nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he knows a bill has finally come due. I walked back into the waiting room and sat down. The fluorescent lights hummed. A vending machine groaned in the corner. My mother was studying a hand hygiene pamphlet like it held the secrets of the universe. Then the double doors swung open. Dr. Patricia Renfro, silver-haired, tall, white coat starched to a crease, walked through mid-sentence with a resident at her elbow, already scanning the room the way she scans every room. Quick, comprehensive, diagnostic. Her eyes swept past my father, past my mother, past Cole at the window and landed on me. She stopped. The resident, still talking, bumped her shoulder. She didn't notice. She crossed the room, stethoscope tapping against her chest with each stride, and stopped in front of my chair. Dr. Carver. Professional. Matter of fact. The way you'd say good morning to someone you see every day. But in this room, in this context, surrounded by these people, those two words hit the air like a flare over dark water. My mother's head snapped up. My father's hand tightened on the armrest. Brienne went still. Cole turned from the window. Dr. Renfro, oblivious to the detonation she'd just triggered, continued. Why are you sitting out here? If your family's back there, let me check with the care team. I'm here with family, I said. My nephew was the drowning case brought in about an hour ago. Her expression shifted. Your nephew? The field CPR on that case was textbook. Wait, that was you. I nodded. Of course it was, she said. She turned to the room, not performing, not making a speech, simply filling in context the way doctors do when they notice a chart is missing a page. You must be incredibly proud, she said, addressing the family like colleagues at a briefing. Hannah is one of the strongest trauma surgeons on our team. The field save she performed today, ventilation first CPR on a pediatric drowning victim in open water without equipment, that's a skill set most ER physicians would struggle with outside hospital walls. She said it like she was reading vitals off a monitor. Factual. Not praise. Inventory. My mother's mouth opened. Nothing came out. She tried again. Yes, of course we know she works here. Dr. Renfro tilted her head, that diagnostic tilt. Works here? She doesn't work here, ma'am. She's an attending surgeon, board certified in trauma. She ran our trauma bay solo last month during a major highway pileup. 9 patients, 0 losses. I submitted her name for the Regional Surgical Commendation this quarter. She paused. She's also being considered for Deputy Chief of Trauma Surgery next year. But you probably already know all that. The silence that followed had weight. It pressed against the walls like barometric pressure before a storm. Dr. Renfro sensed the shift, glanced between me and my family. Did I interrupt something? No, I said. You said exactly what needed to be said. Still puzzled, she tried once more. I'm sorry, I assumed you all knew this. What did you think she did here? My mother couldn't answer. I answered for her, quietly, without heat. She thinks I play nurse. Dr. Renfro looked at me, then my mother, then back at me. Something crossed her face, disbelief, and the particular sorrow of suddenly understanding a colleague's private weight. She didn't comment. She touched my arm once briefly. I'll check on your nephew personally. He's in good hands. Then she walked back through the double doors, and the waiting room belonged to us again. My mother stood up, composure fracturing from the inside out. Her hands shook. Her voice climbed half an octave. Now wait, I have always told people she worked at the hospital. Always. I've always been supportive. I don't understand why she's making this sound like. Mom, the pastor's wife said quietly, you told me she hands out bandages 2 hours ago on the dock. I said no such thing. And you told me she answers phones, added one of the church friends, seated in the corner, clutching her purse. My mother spun toward me. Her eyes were wet. You don't understand. I was trying to your grandmother. She stopped. The sentence stalled at the edge of something she'd spent decades avoiding. I waited. I gave her the silence a surgeon gives a patient before delivering a diagnosis. Not rushing. Not retreating. Just steady. She couldn't finish it, so I did. I know about Grandma Ruth, Mom. I know you were 14. I know she died on a back road coming home from a delivery, and you were waiting at school for a play she never saw. I know you're terrified that what happened to her is happening to me. My mother sat down hard, like her legs had made the decision without her. My father reached for her hand. She let him take it. His face had the collapsed quality of someone who'd realized he'd been standing in the wrong room for a very long time. But Mom, I continued, my voice not rising, instead of telling me you were afraid, you told everyone I was a receptionist. Instead of asking about my work, you erased it. You didn't protect me from medicine. You protected yourself from having to admit I chose it, and I'm good at it. She didn't speak. Her free hand pressed flat against her thigh, fingers splayed, the way people brace themselves when the ground shifts. My father cleared his throat. Pip Hannah, where he looked at her, at me, at the floor. I should have come to your ceremonies. I told myself you didn't need us there. I was wrong. I nodded. It wasn't enough, but it was the first honest thing he'd said to me in years, and I wasn't going to punish honesty with silence. You don't owe me an apology right now, I said. You owe me the truth. Next time someone asks what your daughter does, you tell them. Not your version. Mine. I'll make sure of it, Cole said from the corner. I looked at my mother. I love you, Mom, but I will not let you teach Tyler that what I do doesn't count. He already knows what I am. He's the only person in this family who's been proud of it out loud. She flinched. That landed. They'd all known, every single one of them. They'd just chosen a story that was easier to tell. Dr. Renfro returned 20 minutes later with an update. Tyler's chest x-ray was clear, lung sounds normal, oxygen saturation at 98%, no signs of aspiration pneumonia. They'd keep him overnight for standard observation, but she expected a full recovery. He's asking for his aunt, she added with a small smile. We filed into the pediatric room. Tyler was propped up on pillows, an oxygen cannula draped across his cheeks, looking smaller than usual against the white sheets. His eyes found me before anyone else's. Aunt Hannah. The doctor said I'm going to be fine. I sat on the edge of his bed. She's right, buddy. You're tough. He yawned, the enormous jaw-cracking yawn of a 5-year-old, whose body was demanding sleep after the most frightening hour of his life. She said somebody did really good CPR on me. His eyes were drooping. Was it you? Yeah, buddy. It was me. He smiled, already half asleep. I knew it. Because you're a doctor. I pressed my lips to his forehead. His skin was warm. His heartbeat steady under the thin gown. Go to sleep, Tyler. His eyes closed. I sat there another minute, feeling his pulse through the mattress, counting it out of habit. When I finally looked up, my mother was standing in the doorway. No audience. No church friends. No narrative to manage. Just a mother watching a daughter she'd never figured out how to see. We didn't speak. Some things need more time than a waiting room can give. The following week played out in fragments. Cole called on Tuesday. He'd taken 2 pieces to a frame shop, my medical degree and my board certification, and hung them in his office at Carver Construction, on the wall behind his desk, next to his contractor's license. I should have done this years ago, he said. Yes, I said. You should have. Silence on the line. Not avoidance this time. The honest silence of a man sitting with the weight of what he'd allowed. My father left me a voicemail Wednesday evening. 2 minutes long, mostly dead air. I could hear him breathing, starting sentences and stopping, the creak of his porch chair. At the very end, his voice cracked through. I'm sorry I never came to your ceremonies, kiddo. I told myself you didn't need your old man there. I was wrong about that. It was the most words he'd given me in a year. Brian texted Thursday. I'm sorry about the daycare comment. That was bad. I texted back, that was the whole conversation. It was enough. My mother, nothing. No call. No text. No voicemail. No appearance at my door with an apology and a casserole. I didn't expect one. Her ability to reshape reality around her own comfort was her oldest, most practiced skill. One waiting room wasn't going to retire it. But the pastor's wife told me something the following Sunday. After church, someone had asked my mother about her children and she'd said, my son runs a construction company, and my daughter is a trauma surgeon at the medical center. No qualifier. No diminishment. No, she helps out. For the first time in 10 years, my mother spoke the truth to the people whose opinion she valued most. She didn't say it to me. She said it to her congregation, where reputation is built and maintained by repetition. And maybe that means more than any phone call could. I didn't win that day because my department chief walked into the waiting room. I won years before that. The first night I held a scalpel under fluorescent light and knew, with every nerve in my hand, that this was exactly where I belonged. The lake just made the rest of the world catch up. My family might take longer. But I stopped waiting for them to see me. I already knew who I was. The scalpel always did. That's my story. One lake party, one near drowning, and one sentence from a colleague that unwound 10 years of erasure in 5 seconds flat. If this reminded you that your worth is not decided by the people who refuse to see it, hold on to that. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today.